Joining us now from Brussels is Alexander Stubb. He's European Investment Bank Vice President and the former Prime Minister of Finland. Still with us, Rick Lacaille of State Street Global Advisors. So, Mr. Stubb, do you still worry about the crisis coming back? A kind of, Greece, but much worse, with Italy wanting to get out of the euro?
Well, you obviously always have to be on your toes, and I think in Italy we've seen quite a fundamental change, because Italy used to be a pro-European country, and now of course you have anti-European forces on the march and on the move. The difference with 2008 is that that was basically instigated by the collapse of the Lehman Brothers, which had then obviously previously been linked to the subprime crisis, and then you had a chain of events happening. You always have to be careful. Fortunately, now on the European side, we've created a lot of mechanisms to protect us from crisis, but one never knows.
Okay, what are the fault lines again for understanding this a little bit better, Mrs. Stubb? Does Europe now need to make a case of why it's good for the citizens? And this would have helped with Brexit, would have helped with some of the countries that have either voted far left or far right?
Well, I think 2016 was a sea change in many ways. It's a little bit like 1989 killed communism. One could argue that 2016 at least tried to kill liberalism or free trade, international finance. And we're still in the aftermath of that. And I think a lot of political leaders are starting to understand that it's not good enough anymore to increase the size of the cake. In other words, to have economic growth, you also need to think about how to make people benefit from it, how to divide the cake, if you will. There are a lot of people who are disappointed about globalization as such and are blaming it. And I think this is something that political leaders need to work on.
Rick Lacaille, what do you make of Italy? I mean, if you look at the leaders of the Italian coalition, they're going back on the offensive, right? And going back to the campaign promises. They're itching for a fight with Europe.
They are. And I think this linking up with Orban or others on the right within Europe is very unhealthy. It's prompted this visceral reaction. I think leaders in Europe should ask, what can a populist government in Italy achieve that other governments couldn't? It's pretty obvious that, on immigration, on fiscal deficit, there's sort of negative news on the way, potentially. But what could they do that actually would push Italy further forward?
Okay, but this, Rick, feels different to some of the fights we've had in the past. I mean, Hollande had a fight, right, on the budget laws with Europe. This feels different. So what's the probability of it turning ugly? Well,
the timing's also a little bit different, because we've now got global growth. You could say there's a following wind, and therefore if you're going to do something structural, doing something deep, now's a better time to do it. If you look at Italy's infrastructure deficit, for example, maybe the nature of the spending could be different, and this is something that others could get behind.
Mr. Stubb, should Europe come closer to Italy? I don't know whether it's immigration, whether it's infrastructure, but is there something that the Commission and the other European leaders can give to Italy to keep them on side?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that at the end of the day, it's all about pooling sovereignty and trying to find common solutions to common problems. The problem, of course, in Italy is that they're trying to go counter that. They're trying to talk about national solutions to international problems, whether it's on migration or whether it's on the euro. I personally believe very much in a rules-based system. I think it's very important that you stick to what you say. That is the premise of trust inside the European Union. That's why we have institutions, that's why we have rules, regulations and laws. We can't get into a system whereby you start giving some kind of gifts anytime that there is a self-inflicted or otherwise problem at home. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of it has to do with immigration, and that's an issue that Europe needs to grapple with in the coming months and years.
Yeah, if you look at economic growth, Mr. Stubb, the concern with Italy, it's also on a net basis. It hasn't really grown for the last 10 to 15 years. So again, how should Europe address that?
Well, I think we should first of all be honest with ourselves and admit that we've gone into a period of slow growth. I mean, the growth rates that we have at the moment from a traditional European perspective, say since the Cold War, are actually quite abysmal. Some of them are cyclical, others are structural. We need to start coping with this. The big problem here is that Europe has been the one that usually allows you to grow. It has the internal market, the four freedoms, and then it's the nation state that actually then divides and gives out the welfare. But it seems to be that economic growth is not enough anymore. If you look at voters around the Western countries, whether they're left, right or center, they somehow demand more, and this is something that European leaders need to address. And there's one more thing which is even more important, that's technological change, because it's not immigrants taking jobs, it's technology changing the way in which the labor markets work, and unless we start addressing that, I think we're going to see more Donald Trumps and more Brexits and more Salvinis around this world.